welcome back. Now, farmers already know about the health hazards of organo-phosphates in sheep dips, but what if the person affected by these powerful chemicals was a pilot responsible for hundreds of passengers? Channel 4 News has uncovered disturbing new evidence of airline pilots who claim their physical well-being and their ability to fly is being harmed by such chemicals. They say the OPs used in aviation lubricants are being vaporized in the plane's engines, then sucked into the cabin by the air conditioning systems. John McGee has this special report.
I looked at my hands. I looked at my hands when we were sitting out in the thing, and I was shaking. And my upper body was shaking, and I didn't know why. And so I ended up, the paramedics were looking at me, monitoring me, and at that point they said, this one needs to go to the hospital. So off we went to the hospital, all three of us.
This video of an American air stewardess was shot by her trade union just weeks after she was exposed to noxious fumes in her cabin. It's never been seen on TV before, and is part of a major campaign in the US to alert cabin crew to a particularly nasty form of illness, that of organo-phosphate or OP poisoning. The fact that pilots and crew sometimes smell fumes is not new. Globally, there are over 500 such incidents a year to planes carrying 40,000 passengers. What is new is that many now believe those fumes are OPs. Tonight, we investigate whether British pilots are also being affected.
On one occasion, I had to look back because I couldn't remember whether we put the undercarriage up, for example. I mean, that's serious, those sort of Nazi.
In terms of the threat to passenger and crew health, organophosphate poisoning represents the most acute and serious problem that anybody might experience on an aircraft outside of the context of severe turbulence or a crash. It's a health priority, a health emergency that really has to be addressed by the airlines and the regulatory authorities.
Small amounts of OPs are used in most jet oils to ensure lubrication at high pressure. But if oil leaks past seals into the engine of a jet, it becomes vaporized at very high temperatures. And from there, it's drawn directly into the cabin via the air conditioning system. Problems with OPs are being taken seriously globally, but Britain's response has been rather different. Last month, the House of Lords Committee, chaired by Lord Winston, dismissed the issue as they couldn't find anyone who'd been affected.
But Channel 4 News has learnt of compelling new evidence that does seem to prove that British pilots are indeed being poisoned by organo-phosphates.
We found the first British pilot to be told by a doctor he's got OP poisoning. We've seen the consultant's diagnosis, which states he has symptoms consistent with long-term OP exposure. A captain of a British Aerospace 146 plane for many years, the pilot agreed to talk to us as long as we didn't identify him or his airline. For anonymity, we've disguised his voice.
I suppose 3 days in 4, you climb onto an aeroplane before the first flight of the day, when things were being started up, and there would be certainly smells and sometimes smoke in the cabin.
Grounded from the air, he's now flying a desk and recovering. But while the poisoning lasted, it was unpleasant and potentially dangerous.
The physical symptoms were flu-like symptoms, bunged up in the head, headaches, shortness of breath, and inability to concentrate for any length of time, short-term memory loss, and I suffered from what are described as anxiety attacks.
During one of these attacks, our captain had to hand over the controls to his co-pilot.
I was making silly mistakes that you wouldn't expect a new co-pilot to make, stumbling over checklists and forgetting.
If somebody suffers ill health, even serious ill health, amongst the passengers, that is very, very unfortunate. Could be very sad indeed for that particular person, their family and friends. But if the pilot is suddenly incapacitated by exposure to toxic fumes, that could be very, very damaging indeed, very, very risky, could be a disaster.
Our research shows that this risk must be increasing. The pilots union Balfour say 8 other British pilots have complained of OP poisoning. And we've found 4 examples of pilots who've had to hand over controls of their aircraft mid-flight due to toxic fumes. 2 in the UK and 1 each in Sweden and Australia. We've also learnt that the Air Accident Investigation Branch is now looking to see if OPs were responsible for making a pilot of a 146 ill on board a British European flight last month. British European, who have a fleet of 16 146s, told us that in 20 years of flying they'd found no evidence of OP poisoning. In a statement it said it took the issue seriously and was conducting its own research. It said the only risk from OPs came if they became concentrated, which could cause neurotoxicity a fortnight after exposure.
Are you totally satisfied, then, that the symptoms which are being displayed by crew and pilots could only be organo-phosphates?
Well, there is no other credible explanation in terms of exposure on board aircraft. We've looked into this subject very deeply. We've been carrying out work on a worldwide basis now for nearly 5 years, and certainly we can rule out with considerable confidence the other environmental factors on board aeroplanes.
While the 146 is not the only plane to have had problems with cockpit fumes, there have been many complaints about the aircraft across the world. But British Aerospace told us that it was aware of a number of incidents on British European aircraft. In a statement, it said its fleet had flown over 6 million hours without a single fatality, which made it one of the safest commercial aircraft. It added that analyses of cabin air had produced no evidence of any contaminant approaching safety limits. The company said it had now approved a new generation of engine oils which contained less OPs. While the OP issue has been taking off for some time in the US and Australia, British authorities have been slow to tackle the problem. Liberal Democrat MP Paul Tyler, who chairs the Commons All-Party OP group, has been urging action for 2 years.
Fortunately, we don't seem, as yet, to have had any major disaster. But given the experience of a number of pilots, which has been reported to me from all over the world, I think that may be only a matter of time before something very serious does happen.
But Tyler's campaigning may now be paying off. We've seen a letter written by Environment Minister Michael Meacher last month which admits for the first time the possible scale of the problem. It states reports of smoke and fumes entering the cabin has increased substantially, from 81 in 1996 to 156 last year. He said some crews had reported being partially incapacitated, which was an obvious concern. But the minister said he was more worried about 7 reports of poisoning on board BAE 146s, including 2 in the UK, which was of great concern. While the minister carefully doesn't mention OPs by name, we've learnt his department has now begun to investigate OP poisoning in British planes. But most airlines still use motor oils containing OPs, and given the rising incidence of cabin fumes, it must be asked when the government is going to stop taking evidence and start taking action. John McGee, Channel 4 News.
And we asked to speak to the Civil Aviation Authority, which regulates aviation industry, about these concerns. In a statement, they told us that there is no evidence that under typical operating conditions, the products in engine oil can break down and produce organo-phosphates in an aircraft cabin. Asked whether they were prepared to investigate further, they said they were aware of concerns and were awaiting findings from investigations in 3 countries, including Britain. They added, if evidence arises from these, we will act upon it. And we shall be watching. You are watching Channel 4 News. It's just after 7:30. Our main headlines tonight. Thousands of protesters have brought Westminster to